I'm not going to make you wait for this. There it is. 1,041 Famicom cartridges. Roughly 120 of them are boxed. One, for some strange reason, I got the manual with. And then the rest are cartridge only. Now there are 1,042 Famicom cartridges in a complete set, and that final cartridge is in this box. For the past 657 days, I've been documenting the Famicom library. One cartridge a day, in chronological order. The Famicom launched in 1983 with these three games: Donkey Kong, Donkey Kong Jr., and Popeye. Its dominance of the video game market was not assured. 1983 saw the launch of nearly a dozen consoles in Japan, and some severe technical problems with the system caused it to be recalled early on. Of course, it not only survived, but thrived, and the 11 years of its lifespan were the most turbulent years of video game history. When the final game was released, Takahashi Meijin no Bokenjima 4, it was only about 6 weeks before the release of the PlayStation. The Famicom saw companies rise and fall, genres born and died. It was there for the trends, the industry shifts, the drama, and all of that is reflected in its library. So that's why I collected these games, and why I've spent so much time just documenting them. For many of these games, my videos are the only ones in English that actually drills down into them. Of course, that's usually because they're such minor games that no one would ever care to, but still, I'm the only one. So, what makes up a complete Famicom collection? Anytime you have a system as popular as this, and with as large a library, there are a lot of edge cases. Do these count? A lot of people say no. I wound up going with yes. The important thing if you're crazy enough to collect like this is to define your boundaries. So first up for me, commercially released Famicom cartridges. There are giveaways and some special items that someone with deep pockets could reasonably buy. My take is that they're nice to collect, but not part of the set. If you start including things like Mobile Suit Zeta Gundam Final Version, which had 1,000 copies given away to schoolchildren, then you have to start including things like the Kinnikuman prize versions, of which there were 8 different versions, each having 1 copy. Or the wedding edition of Binary Land, which was only given out at the wedding of a Hudson employee who had hidden love messages in some of their early games. As far as I know, less than 5 copies exist in the wild of that one. So you had to be able to go into a store and buy it. They also had to be Famicom games. Now that sounds obvious, but there's a few quirks to that. Take the Famicom Disk System, for example. There were over 180 games released for it. The processing is still done by the Famicom. Are they Famicom games or not? Well, most people count the disk system as a separate platform. The format's different, and it changes the Famicom hardware a bit. But then you have things like the DATAC, an expansion that Bandai released for the Famicom very late in its life. It used cartridges that plugged into the DATAC unit. And there's 2 Famicom games that have expansion cartridges, Karaoke Studio and Nantetate Baseball. Opinion among Famicom collectors is divided with them. It basically comes down to they're cartridges so they count, and they don't plug into the Famicom so they don't count. I fall into the latter camp. Obviously, the games released on cassette are right out. There are also some re-releases with slightly updated graphics. Things like Hyper Olympic Bakadono Edition. Japanese players don't count them as part of the set, so neither will I, though I do think they are cool to get. Some people restrict the list solely to games, and if you do that, you can eliminate roughly a dozen from the list. Basically, fortune-telling, programming, and horse race prediction software. Initially, I was intending to make my list games only, but I decided it was kind of hard to divide things like that, and decided on all commercially released software. Okay, so now you know what you're looking at. Let's open this box and put the last piece in place. This last box came to me from Surugaya, probably the best source online to order Japanese collectibles through. Not the cheapest, but they are very convenient. I had been keeping an eye out for this last game to show up on them for quite a while, and actually sourced another copy which fell through. But fortunately for me, Surugaya listed a copy right then and that was the first copy they had in 6 months. So naturally I snatched it right up. And what is that last game? Well, it's right on top here, and it is Die Hard. Not the most expensive game in the world, but strangely hard to get a copy of. In fact, all of the games by Pack-In Video based on American movies are kind of hard to get. Well, now that I've got it out, let's put this puppy to bed. And let me answer a few of the obvious questions here. The bulk of my collection I purchased through j4u.co.jp. They're a single retailer, but they handle their inventory in a Dutch auction, which means that the prices drop a fixed percentage every day until it hits a floor or somebody buys it. If you don't mind your cartridges being roughed up a little bit, you can get a whole lot of Famicom games at $1 each. When it came to tracking down the rare games, I used Surugaya. They don't refresh their inventory as often, and they can be relatively expensive, but rare games tend to show up with them with greater frequency. And then when I was really desperate for something, it was time to break out Yahoo Auctions, Mercari, and Rakuten. I used Bai as my remailer site. I've been using them since they were Tenso, and they're generally pretty good about addressing problems, though their support doesn't speak English. So what were the last games that I needed to get? Well, there was Over Horizon, a shoot-'em-up that's notoriously expensive, Double Moon Densetsu, one of 2 competitors for the rarest RPG on the Famicom, the amazing action game Metal Storm. I put off buying it for a long time because I have an NES copy. Kaiketsu Yanchamaru 3, or to use the title they gave to the first game in the US, Kid Nicky 3. That happens to be the last game that notoriously awful developer Micronix made for the Famicom. So that's something to look forward to. Moon Crystal. A lot of Hex games are painfully rare, and Moon Crystal's the only action game they made. If you were ranking Famicom games by how expensive they are, Moon Crystal would be number 4. Another super expensive game, though not as bad as Moon Crystal, is Bubble Bobble 2. At least I wasn't paying US prices on this one. Hyoro-chan is another game I put off picking up because I own the NES version. This is a port of a European computer game, and in the rare case of the reverse Yonoid, they substituted the main character with a chocolate bar mascot. Business Wars was one of my last bad games to get. It wasn't especially expensive, but I wound up with a boxed copy. Oedo Twinbee is part of a set of Famicom games Konami released that were originally Disk System titles. I had the Disk System versions of all of them, so they got pushed to the bottom of my priority list. Ai-Sensei no Oshiete is a good example of why only an idiot would buy a complete set of cartridges for a system. It's not a game, it's an astrology package that offers to help you with your love life. It's also one of 2 serious competitors for the title of Rarest Commercially Released Software for the Famicom. Biomiracle Bokute Upa is a brilliant game on the Famicom Disk System. The Famicom version's a little bit worse, and also about 20 times as expensive. And finally there's Gundeck, known as Vice Project Doom in the US. I'm actually relatively close to recording the episode for this one. Probably about 3 weeks off for me. Biomiracle and Gundeck actually arrived yesterday. They were supposed to be in the same package as Die Hard. And on that topic, the other obvious question here is, what were the most expensive games to get? Well, there's Ego Meikon, the other game that might be the rarest Famicom game. The number of cartridge-only copies I've seen for sale could be counted on the fingers of a particularly clumsy carpenter. All of the curved-top Taito games are rare, but Jetsons is the rarest of them all, and it has the price to go with it. Metal Slater Glory, the game that destroyed HAL Labs, and in the early days of Famicom collecting, this was the Holy Grail. Of course, people soon realized that there were other games much harder to get. Which brings me to the 2 games that duel for the top spot of most expensive Famicom game. I paid a bit less for Summer Carnival Rekka 92, the absolutely amazing shooter brought to you by the same people who developed Burai Fighter. And of course, the most expensive Famicom game of all, Gimmick. A technical masterpiece that is beloved by all. So where do I go from here now that my collection is complete? Well, no collection is ever truly complete. I'm going to be looking for copies of games with nicer labels, get boxed copies of games where I happen to like the art, I'm always keeping an eye out for the stranger Famicom peripherals. But barring some special circumstances, like a really small library, or one where the rarest and most expensive game is relatively cheap, I'm not doing anything like this again. There's too many of these Famicom cartridges that were pretty expensive and were purchased solely to check off a box. Well, check off a box and make a Famidaily video about it. Having one of the very few complete Famicom sets outside of Japan is a bit of an ego boost, but not enough of one that I want to go around buying up baseball games again. The important thing about collecting anything is that you enjoy doing it, and feeling like you have to finish is a good way to drain that fun out. But I'm done now. I'm gonna go play some PC Engine stuff.